Hi there, welcome. In this episode, I want to introduce myself to you and how I came to be doing the work that I'm doing, why I do what I do, and more specifically, why I'm wanting to engage with you in this format on the podcast and the YouTube channel. So stick around and hopefully you'll learn a little more. Hi there, I'm Nick Tovey. Thanks for being here. If you are new to the channel, go ahead and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about me and my work, you can head to nicktovey.com. And if you're wanting to get more deeply engaged in this conversation, why not go over and become a patron on Patreon, so you can get patron-only content and experiences there. So in this episode, I really want to introduce myself to you. Who am I? Who am I? What do I do? Why am I here talking to you about all of these things? And how did I get to be this person that I am today doing this work? Gosh, it's a long story, and I'll try not to bore you too much with that, but I think it's good and important to give you a little context, a little background information around who I am and why I'm doing this sort of stuff, and why you would want to listen to me. So obviously you can probably tell by my accent, I was born in the UK, currently living in Australia in northern New South Wales, close to Byron Bay. And I've been in Australia for coming up to 26 years now. That's a long time. But I grew up a very working class, very average English lad in the north of England, and went and joined the Navy as soon as I could to get away from the environment that I lived in. Not that there was anything wrong with my family or anything like that, but I just wanted strongly to go and create my own life and find my own independence. So I found a way to do that, and for me that was the Royal Navy. So I went and joined the Navy a week after my 16th birthday, so it was quite an adventure. Did 5 years in the Navy, left the Navy after a medical discharge after a bung knee, and then I eventually came to Australia travelling, and initially was here as a backpacker, doing the backpack around the world travels, and landed in Sydney. Eventually then met the woman who was going to become my wife and the mother to my children. So I went down that track and had a marriage and was married for around 13 years. So I had a very long-term relationship with this woman and did the whole family thing. It was quite a big experience, of course, and of course I learned a lot about myself, about relationships, about how not to do relationships during that experience. This world of relationships and sex and sexuality has always been something that I've found interesting, intriguing and exciting, and of course daunting at times. So I've always had an interest in learning about it from a very young age. From about the age of 10, I was very much interested in engaging with girls, engaging with the opposite sex. It was very, very much something that I enjoyed. I enjoyed spending time with girls. I enjoyed looking at girls, and of course, back then, this was when was this? This was the mid 80s. Thankfully, we didn't have technology like we do now, so I wasn't succumbed to the modern day pornography world. Thank goodness, because I think it would have been terrible for me. But of course, it was there. I had my own experiences with pornography, and I found it interesting. I found it very intriguing. But more than that, I learned that I enjoyed the company of girls very, very young. I started exploring sexually at a very young age comparatively to a lot of people. Growing up in the northern English semi-rural villages, there wasn't a great deal to do. We couldn't entertain ourselves in very many ways, so we hang around in groups of boys and girls, and we would explore and we would experiment and we would get up to all sorts of mischief. And I look back at these times, and sometimes with a bit of shock, but also I'm glad I had those experiences. I had a lot of really positive, beautiful sexual experiences at a very young age. So I started exploring what pleasure was, what it was to interact with my own body and a body of a young woman at that time, at a very young age. And I also enjoyed just having the company of girls. I found that I could engage in conversations, I could understand and be understood in much more deep ways than I could with the boys that I was hanging about with. Yeah, I was very much a lad's lad as well. I was into my sports, I was into the usual things that young boys were into, but I also recognized that I did enjoy the company of girls. And of course I had girlfriends. I had girlfriends pretty regularly. I would go from girlfriend to girlfriend. I'm definitely, knowing what I know now, I can see and understand that I was and have been, I am a recovering love addict, and I did seek a certain level of validation and approval and from the girlfriends that I had. So there was, yes, I enjoyed their company, but of course there were also underlying psychological holes that I was wanting to fill in some ways. Yeah, we can definitely talk about that a little more, as I'm sure we will. But I recognized that I enjoyed relationships, so I would go from relationship to relationship, girlfriend to girlfriend, all through my teenage years. Then I joined the Navy at 16, and of course did the obligatory girl in every port experience. Which was fantastic. I was respectful to the women that I engaged with, and of course I'm definitely could look back and go, ooh, that probably wasn't so good, and made some choices with the people that I engaged with that I probably could have looked back on and wished I could have changed. But the reality is, I look back at a lot of these experiences with positivity, and they have all been great learning experiences. Not only learning about how to be with another person, but of course learning about myself. And this is something which you'll gather from a lot of what I say, is that my perception is that relationships are the greatest arena for personal growth and personal development, because we are faced with a mirror who we cannot help but get mirrored all of our shit, all of our stuff back to us. And of course, often this mirror is very willfully offering those reflections to us. And of course, there's no other area where the hearts are at stake. Our vulnerabilities, our hidden pains, our hidden wounds are very, very much at stake when it comes to intimate relationship. What else was going on for me at this time was this: because of my experience, the experience that I had of hyper-masculine violence and assault, I was also beginning to really understand how woefully ill-equipped I was to deal with my experience, to deal with these things called emotions, and the challenges and the potential conflicts that were coming up for me. A lot of my PTSD symptoms were crippling panic at the face of conflict, any potential conflict. So even if it was a conflict I wasn't involved in, I would walk down the street, hear someone arguing in a house or down a alleyway or something, and I would go into severe panic mode. My body, my nervous system would collapse and I would not be able to function very well. So I started to realize how much of a common experience this was for men in the world. And on my search for understanding and for education, I'd go into the bookshops and look at the self-help shelves in the bookshop, and I'd notice all of these amazing books, and all of them seemed to be marketed towards women. So this is back in the early 2000, like 99, 2000, early 2000s. So things have got a little better, but not much. When you look at this world, the self-help world, it's very much marketed towards women. And here I was as a man going through this experience, going, what the hell? Who's here to listen to me? Who can offer me some understanding, some support, some even just a compassionate ear to hear me in my experience? So I started to recognize that this was a great hole, a chasm that was existing in our society, is that men, when they go through these challenging, difficult, traumatic experiences, not only do they not have the skills and the resources to be able to deal with it themselves, because men are taught to do anything but deal with emotion, not only do we not have the resources, but the world itself is really uncomfortable with a man who's going through these challenging situations. And so I started to notice this, how uncomfortable people would get when I'm talking about my experience and the ways in which I was feeling unstable, unable to hold myself together. It was a very difficult experience to be on the receiving end of. So I saw this as a massive gap, and I wanted to be the answer to this gap. I wanted to go and save my brothers, save my brothers who were also going through this, potentially difficult experiences, and to help equip and resource men with the tools to deal with shit when it happens. So I went and studied more and more and became a counselor and wanted to work with men specifically. So my first gig, my first job as I became qualified as a counselor was working with for a not-for-profit organization, an anti-violence organization, and my role was working with men who were charged with domestic violence. And some of these men were coming to see me as part of a court order. So they were mandated by the courts to go and do an anger management program and learn about how to best manage their anger. And so I was, these were the men that terrified me. These were the men that triggered my PTSD symptoms the most. Scary, angry, violent men. Of course, these were the men, the archetypal men that caused my trauma in the first place. So it was the perfect deep end for me to dive into as I was becoming a counselor. So I ran this anger management program for another organization. I also ran anti-bullying programs in schools. And I was, at the same time as working for this organization, I was also starting to build my own practice. So my private practice became a coaching practice. So I realized that as a counselor, if I call myself a counselor, a lot of men won't come to see me because there is a lot of stigma around needing a counselor for emotional problems. Yeah. I'm sure a lot of the men hearing this could probably understand that. So I discovered that a coaching approach, which is much more directive, much more solution focused, much more, here's a problem, how we're going to fix it, very much a masculine, friendly way of working. So I started to build a coaching practice and worked with men from all different walks of life in that arena, providing one-on-one coaching as well as men's groups, running men's groups, and as well as running workshops. Loved it. Still an area of this work that I'm extremely passionate about. I recently wrote and launched my first book, The Revolutionary Man, available on Amazon if you'd like to read it. I'll put the link in the show notes. And so, yeah, it's still an area of great passion and interest for me. But along the way, what I started to notice was, as I was working with all of these men, both in my private practice as well as working in the public sector, a lot of the issues that these men were coming to me with were relational, were issues of challenge in relationship, challenge with communication, challenge with dealing with emotions, their own and their partners, challenge with sex and sexuality and intimacy. And so I started to realize that there's a problem here, because a lot of these men are having these problems and these challenges and wanting to work with it, but I'm only working with half the equation. So I started to realize that, I need to bring the partners into the conversation. I need to work more with couples and make my work, reshuffle and redesign my work so it is more oriented towards relationships and sexuality and intimacy. You know, these are the three areas that are extremely fascinating to me. Another area that is extremely fascinating to me is trauma. Not only have I had my own experience with trauma, but through that experience and through the work that I've done, what I get to understand and really, really clearly recognize is that we are a traumatized society. Pretty much every client that I work with, when we look at whatever their presenting issue is, it's very clearly, if we work back down a timeline, it's trauma that has caused some sort of wounding, which has then gone on to cause some sort of maladaptive practice in order to prevent, to keep themselves safe. And then, of course, that goes on to create relational problems, sexual problems, addiction problems, you name it. Yeah. So whenever we are presenting with a particular issue, this is what I'm experiencing right now. Often when we look back at anything, the root cause is some trauma. And I don't use that word trauma lightly. It's a word that it's very much a buzzword today. And I think that's a good thing. And of course, whenever anything's a new thing, it becomes overused and inappropriately used. But trauma is a spectrum. Yeah, trauma exists across a spectrum. And of course, every experience of trauma is subjective, is their own. And everybody responds to what could be called trauma in their own way. So therefore, it is such a unique and individual experience. So it's very difficult for an outsider to say this was trauma or not trauma. Yeah, it's very much it's an experience that the experiencer has to define for themselves with our help. So it is a word that often gets used inappropriately and thrown around a little too often, too willfully. But at the same time, it's not a word that is reserved for what we often imagine the big traumas to be, you know, abuse, rape, war experiences. You know, these are, of course, big, massive traumas. But when we're talking about childhood traumas particularly, we have to understand that the trauma we're talking about is happening to a child. So when we see the world through that child's eyes, it's much more simple. So what we as an adult can look at and say that's not traumatic. Why would that be traumatic? When we're taking away that child's perspective and not understanding it from that child's perspective. When you think of, abandonment, of course, abandonment can look like the stereotypical dropping the baby at the church door and walking off. Yes, of course, huge abandonment. But abandonment can also look like something small, what we can perceive as being quite small, like a mother or a father walking out of us on a crying child who needs nurturing, who needs love, who needs connection in that moment. These are the experiences that can create rifts in a child's development, which then, of course, can then go on to create rifts and challenges when we're talking about intimacy and relationships. So as you can tell, this is something that I find really, really interesting. I'm very passionate about it, and I love to learn. Something that I think is really important for you to understand also is that I'm here working this out with you. Yes, I've made it my life's work. I've made it an intention to learn and to study and to educate myself on a wide range of subjects when it comes to trauma, to relationships, and to sex and sexuality. And I'm also a human being who's got my own relationship biography, my own childhood wounding, my own stuff that gets in the way of me creating full, open, intimate, vulnerable connection, and the ways in which I try to defend against vulnerability, the ways in which I screw it up. We all screw it up. So this is something that I want, this is an important factor that I want to bring into this channel, into this way of me working with you, is to recognize that I'm on this journey with you. I want to engage in a conversation with you, and therefore I want to share my own experiences, the ways in which I've screwed it up, the ways in which I've learned, the ways in which I struggle still today, yeah? But also I want to hear from you. I want your input. I want your challenges. I want your questions. Be engaged with me in this inquiry. So, that brings me to yes, this is how I've got to be where I'm at now. This is the journey that I've taken to do the work that I'm doing now. And here I am today speaking to you in this way, trying to bridge a gap between lack of understanding and doing relationship well to the best of our ability. And most of that is just coming from a place of commitment and saying a resounding yes to a quality of relationship and a quality of sexual interaction, a quality of intimacy that we deserve, that is available to us. We do not have to settle for anything less than great. And this is a really, really important thing when we come into relationships and intimacy. So this is what the podcast and the YouTube channel is all about. It's about a conversation. It's about engaging in this conversation with you. I really want to make it a co-creation with my listeners and my viewers to really dive into some of these juicy, gritty, vulnerable, raw, and often messy subjects that, let's face it, who the hell has taught us about relationship? Who the hell has given us the education that we need in order to do relationship well? Like I said in my trailer video, we are woefully ill-equipped to deal with relationship, to deal with sexuality and intimacy issues. Nobody teaches this stuff. The education we've been given at school is laughable. And if we were given any education intentionally by our parents and the people bringing us up, then often it was probably not great either. And it would have been imbued with our parents' shame and awkwardness and beliefs and values around what relationships and sexuality are, which are probably not valid and relevant for you, who you are, where you are today. So this is an opportunity for us all to explore some of these questions and these really juicy and crucially important topics. Relationship is life. Life is all about relationship. If we can't do relationships well, we are missing out on a crucially important part of life. We are communal beings. We need connection just as much as we need food and water. You know, up there on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is a basic core need, is to have connection with other human beings. Connection that makes us feel validated, seen, understood, and warm and loved. Yeah. So why don't we do that? Yeah. What do you reckon? Should we do that? Should we make that our reality? I think a world where we are all having decent relationships, where we can have difficult conversations without it turning into a mess and a shit fight, and where people are hurt and you know, bleeding on the sidelines. This is unnecessary. Of course, conflict happens in relationship, and that's a subject for another time. But how can we do that well? How can we have the conversations around sex and intimacy and pleasure and consent in a way which is working for us? How can we deal with some of the challenges and the fears and the vulnerabilities we feel when it comes to connection and when it comes to sexuality? How can we understand where we exist on the spectrum of the alphabet, the LGBTQIA++ alphabet? It's important. Sexual identity, sexual expression is a really important conversation to be had. So, join me. I've spoken enough today. Join me. Now it's over to you. Put your questions in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. I want to engage with you. Send me an email if you'd like it to remain more anonymous. I'll put the email address in the show notes also. Engage with me. Ask me your questions. What would you like to learn about? What would you like me to talk about? I really want your input, your questions, this co-creation. Okay, I will leave it at that. Thank you so much for being here, and don't forget, subscribe, click the notification bell on YouTube, hop over to the Patreon, become a patron so you can get content that isn't available to everybody else just on the YouTube channel or the podcast, and really get to engage as a community in Patreon. Okay, farewell. See you later. Much love.